'cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried.
Shelves can go empty overnight. The worst time to prepare is during the aftermath. And honestly, it might already be too late. Smart Americans trust My Patriot Supply to help them prepare before crisis comes. And right now, they're making it easier than ever. Order their 4-week emergency food supply today and get a 72-hour food kit completely free. Actually, forget that. How about get 4 72-hour food kits completely free? That's almost 2 weeks of bonus meals at no cost. Each of these My Patriot Supply kits offers over 2,000 calories per day of delicious, easy to prepare meals that last up to 25 years. That's real peace of mind. No last minute panic, no empty shelves, just knowing you're covered. Stock up today before this deal disappears. Because when an emergency hits, food could be the first thing to go. Go to preparewithvince.com to claim your kit plus an extra 12 days of food for free, almost 2 weeks of bonus meals at no cost. Once again, that's preparewithvince.com to claim your kit plus an extra 12 days of food absolutely free. Preparewithvince.com. All right. April Fool's Day elections yesterday, special elections in both Florida and Wisconsin. You and I have been talking about this in depth over the course of the past week. And I'm getting some reactions pouring in, including Dygowski21 saying Vince is in the t-shirt size schmedium. Thank you for that election analysis. It's Diego. I should have said that. Diowski. I don't even know. Anyway, thank you for that. So what is going on in Wisconsin? Wisconsin voted for voter ID, so that's one good thing, said Armageddon. That's right. So let's just start with some of the good news here. In Wisconsin, the voters in that state voted overwhelmingly yesterday to say, yes, we love voter ID. We love it so much, we want it enshrined in the state constitution. Now, this is an important thing because Wisconsin already had voter ID as a part of its law. But the challenge in Wisconsin is that the lefty Supreme Court there, which has been in power and is now retaining power, more on that in a moment, has been threatening to unseat voter ID, to make it more vulnerable to voter fraud in the state. The voters there saying, we don't want it to be more vulnerable to voter fraud. And so they've enshrined it in the state constitution. They've added one further barrier to that radical Supreme Court, tearing up election integrity in the state. That is a massive, massive win, and we should acknowledge that. We should take it for what it is. Simultaneously, in Florida, those 2 Republican seats in Congress, well, they're still Republican. So they're not pickups, they're retentions. But in both of those cases, the Republican candidates winning in those special elections in Florida to replace both Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz. So again, I'll take it. Those are victories. I'm happy to have them. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court race yesterday didn't go our way. It didn't. Brad Schimmel lost to Susan Crawford, and it wasn't a close race. This wasn't like a narrow little race. It was a 10-point loss. Susan Crawford ending, as of this morning, with 55% of the vote to Brad Schimmel's 45% of the vote. It's not close. It's not close. So what happened here? Well, let's unwind the election a little bit. For one, let's look at voter turnout. One thing that we've been discussing that you should definitely know by now, you saw it happen in 2024, that if Republicans are going to win in the era where Trump has reshaped the party into a party that serves the needs of everyday Americans, you've got to get low propensity voters out to vote. Low propensity. Do you know what low propensity means? Low propensity means they don't show up every election. They only show up occasionally when you can really speak to an issue that matters to them. They'll show up. It wasn't always this way. Republicans used to have high propensity voters, the kinds of voters who would show up always, all the time, no matter what. And this comes from the era of the country club Republican, where you had, college educated, high income Republicans, people who were very active in their communities and civil society stuff. And they would show up to vote on a routine basis on all these elections, whether or not they were a standard presidential election, midterms, off year. This one yesterday was off year, off cycle. It's about as off as you can possibly get. It's an odd year election at an odd time of year. It's not November, it's in April. Special elections. And so Republicans, their challenge is we got to get these low propensity voters out. How many people actually voted yesterday in Wisconsin? Well, it was a big number for an off year, off cycle election. It was 2.3 million people who voted. Do you know how many people voted in the presidential election last year? 3.4 million. So 2.3 million yesterday, 3.4 million, an additional over 1 million people voted in that presidential election last year. Do you know how much Trump won that election by in Wisconsin? Less than a point. Less than a point. It wasn't quite a nail biter, but it was close in Wisconsin. President Trump picked that up. Of course, he picked up every swing state in last year's contest. But what this should tell you is that you need to figure out a way to get the low propensity voter to actually show up. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people doing some finger pointing today. This always happens in the wake of these elections where Republicans have you're feeling a little dejected about how things went in a particular race. This is a meaningful race. And for whatever reason, I'm seeing people pointing fingers at Scott Presler as if that guy had somehow let everybody down. Scott Presler did not let anybody down. Scott Presler brought his operation into the state. He was able to get people, including people in this very chat, to send text messages to get all of these votes out there. The get out the vote component of this, Scott was in there in a very aggressive way. And there were a number of other groups that did that too. Elon Musk was spending money through America PAC. Turning Point Action was in there. The Libre Initiative. The get out the vote component of this, well, they were out there. They were on the streets. They were sending the text messages. They were doing the work. Here's where I detect a failure. The message. It's the message. So I went back and I looked at the advertising for Susan Crawford and Brad Schimel. I said, what are these guys even talking about? Like, what do they advertise to the people of Wisconsin about the merits of their candidacies? Why would you support each of these people? And in Susan Crawford's case, if you can believe it, she ran. She's the lefty. She is the radical lefty who now is getting a seat on this state Supreme Court. She ran on the idea that she is tough on crime. That's right. She said she was tough on crime. George Soros was funding the effort to get her into office. She's not tough on crime, but this is the game of pretend they were playing. Advertising, we are tough on crime. Advertising that Brad Schimel is weak on crime, trying to turn a strength into a weakness for her Republican-backed opponent. And then, of course, she ran, as all lefties do, on the issue of abortion. She said that she was going to protect a woman's right to choose to kill a child. Of course, they don't say kill a child in the ad. It's not popular in the advertising. But these are the issues that she ran on. And if you go back to the exit poll in Wisconsin from just a couple months ago to the presidential election, and you look at the data there, you can see why she did that. It's obvious. In Wisconsin, do people want crime in their communities? No, they don't. They want you to get tough on crime. They'd like the crime to stop, please. No more Kenosha's, no more any of it. They want it to stop. And so she ran on that. Whether or not she's even going to do it, she's not. I mean, George Soros supports her. So she's a weak on crime person, but she pretended. And on the issue of abortion, once again, she looks at the polling and she says, well, this will activate my base to come out and vote. And it did. Democrats in the state of Wisconsin yesterday. Meanwhile, what did Brad Schimmel's campaign run on? Brad Schimmel's campaign ran on a message that you and I can understand for sure, which is we don't want Democrats to have more power. Brad Schimmel's campaign was wrapped up, at least the people who were advocating for him, spending money on him. They were running ads like, well, if the left wins here, Republicans might lose congressional seats, because the Supreme Court will redraw the district lines. Okay, that means something to me. That means a lot to me. If that ad was built for me, I would say, man, that's horrifying. If that ad was built for you, you would say, that's horrifying. We don't want that. We can't give Democrats any more power. We can't let them steal congressional seats. We can't let that happen. But what does that mean to the average Wisconsin voter who is a low propensity turnout person? Half of Wisconsin voters have a union member in their household. Did you know that? Half of Wisconsin voters have at least one union worker in their household. What does that mean to those families, those low propensity voters? What do they think of Washington to begin with? What do they think of these political parties? Do they feel well served by them? Are they so interested in the well-being of the Republican Party that they look around and they go, man, I got to stand up for Republicans? Hell no. You think they care about the well-being of the Republican Party? Not a chance. Not a chance. It's not about the party. In the end, these elections, especially with low propensity voters, are like, why would I show up to vote? I don't always show up to vote. I occasionally do. What's the rationale for why I would show up to vote? You know why Wisconsin voters showed up for Trump? You know why they did that? The top two reasons: immigration and the economy. Immigration and the economy. That's it. Those are the big numbers. Immigration was the biggest. The economy was the second. And so, how did Republicans speak to those needs in order to bring out low propensity voters? Oh, it turns out they didn't in Wisconsin. And so, as we analyze this vote, it's probably important to say, okay, so we have a get out the vote effort. You guys like Scott Pressler are doing a good job. You have people in our Rumble chat who were literally texting people in Wisconsin to get them out. But what about the messages? What advertising were they seeing? What reason would they go to the polls here? And it can't be enough to say you have to support Republicans. That's ridiculous. It can't be enough. Now, here's the thing. We've got concern. I've seen a lot of concern about, okay, Vince, nobody's saying Vince, but generally on social media. What about the role that fraud played here? What about the role of fraud? Maybe the election was stolen. Let me just look at the margin with you for a moment. First of all, it's a 10 percentage point margin. So if it was fraud that resulted in this outcome, it would be a massive, massive, massive amount of fraud that would lead to this outcome. That's one. Two, people point in the fraud case, they point to, well, look at the voter ID initiative. Voter ID. You've got people who voted for a constitutional amendment to add voter ID to the state of Wisconsin, and they voted for the radical lefty to join the Supreme Court. How could that possibly be? How could both of those things happen in the same election? And the answer to that question, at least on a basic level, is why don't we just take a look at support for voter ID? Where is that at? And it turns out that Americans of every political persuasion wildly support voter ID. I'm sure many of you know this by now, but this is such a stinker for the Democrats, such a loser for that party, that they've actually de-emphasized their messaging around this. Candidly, they rarely talk about this issue. Occasionally you see them talk about it, but they rarely talk about voter ID anymore because it's like men and women's sports. Nobody is for that. Nobody's for men and women's sports. And not having an ID to vote, nobody is for that. In fact, by majorities, Democrats, 67% of Democrats say you should have an ID to vote. That was a Gallup survey in October of last year before the presidential election. That's in the heat of political debate in the United States of America. 67% of Democrats nationwide said you should have a voter ID to vote. Republicans, 98%. Independents, 84%. This issue, in case you ever look back and you're thinking like, hey, where have conservatives actually won? What are the fights that we've won on? Well, we've won on law and order. Americans want law and order. They don't like the chaos. They don't like the riots. It's a crystal clear message. They want to support the cops. We've won on that issue. Boom, done. We've won on men and women's sports. People don't want men and women's sports. No more games. No more playing with the mental illness. It's insane. No more cheating in women's sports. Americans are wildly with us. So if you're looking for areas where we've dominated, those are definitely areas. The other is voter ID. Everybody supports voter ID, regardless of your political party. So yes, at the upper levels of the party, you have devious political operatives among Democrats who are trying to stop voter ID from coming into place because they do believe that fraud works to their benefit. They do believe that not having an ID is a way for them to win elections. But meanwhile, the rest of the country, to include a whole bunch of people who vote for Democrats, overwhelming majorities, support voter ID. So if you're looking for anything to help you sort of understand, make sense of some of this in Wisconsin, look no further than that. That is a crystal clear expression of where voters are. It's true in not just the nation, it's true in Wisconsin too. Wisconsin surveys have demonstrated that it's wildly popular, voter ID. That's why it's now enshrined in the Constitution in Wisconsin. That explains that. And then finally, on this issue of fraud, as we look to it as a potential for an explanation, I am in no way ruling out the role that fraud can play in any election. I never rule out how devious Democrats can be in their pursuit of power.